Evening, everyone. I am so happy to have you here. And I guess I should have clarified this before. Jessie, did you want to do any introductory statement?
Welcome to How to Write a Strong Personal Statement workshop. We are thrilled to co-host this with the amazing team from Nationally Competitive Awards, Dr. Pat Whitlow and Emily Sully. Without further ado.
Okay, I should not have asked her for her input there. Thank you, Jessie. And welcome everybody tonight. We're so glad that you logged on for this conversation about writing a personal statement. And I should mention at the beginning that we are recording in the event that maybe we have some students that are not able to be with us this evening. I also think we have a little survey question for you. Is that correct, Emily? Oh, and there it is. I guess I will share the results. It's showing up on my screen. I don't know. Are you going to share the results, announce, Emily, or are we just, is that for our purpose, just to let us know?
Oh, I did. Can you all see them? Okay.
No, me. Maybe because I'm sharing the PowerPoint.
Oh, can you not see? Looks
Mhm.
like we've got one student who is applying for, this is out of 8. One student that's applying for Beckman, 2 applying for CURE, 2 applying for RUs, 4 said other, and 1 said not sure yet.
Okay, this is really helpful to know. Thank you all for answering that. Because the way I am going to speak tonight, and Emily may chime in at some point, Jessie may, anybody that has a good suggestion, feel free. But I'm going to be talking about this in a kind of a general way. And actually, that's the advice I'm going to give you, not to write a personal statement. But because I have a lot of people trying to do different things, I'm going to try to speak for the broad middle in a way. But at the same time, I'm going to say to you up front, if you have a very specific award with a very specific emphasis, I want you to write to that, not a more general piece of advice that I give you tonight. And if you have questions about that, I hope you will reach out to Emily and I in the Competitive Awards Office, or in the Office of Undergraduate Research, or the Writing Center. I mean, there's lots of places on campus that are used to reading personal statements, and have them, just say, here's the prompt, and I'm not entirely sure. I don't want you to, there may be one item in here tonight that I talk about that doesn't particularly fit the personal statement that you have to write, and I don't want you to, to feel like that you have to take every piece of advice, because it is going to be more general. The one thing that I do want to say to everybody, no matter what you're applying for, now, when you're in graduate school, as a professional, this is good advice for lots of different things that you will apply for. Read the prompt. Read the prompt. We get so excited. We maybe in a hurry, or we think we know what the funder. We have a tendency to read the prompt very shallowly, or maybe read it once and then assume we know what they want. I would read the prompt really carefully, and I would then think about what you think they want out of that prompt. Sometimes they're super specific, and you want to respond to the prompt, okay? If they didn't want that, they wouldn't have written the prompt that way, right? So you need to assume that the funder has a reason for that. I did want to add this note this year. I don't think I said this last year, but if the prompt is vague, or if it's overly broad, or if it's just a general statement, tell us about yourself kind of thing, then I know that's really hard, actually. It's easier if they have given you specific guidance. Sometimes they do not. But in that case, You can sort of glance through the overall application to see if it gives you some clues. You can look at the funder's mission and values to guide the direction of your statement. For example, I'll take something that may not be relevant to this group tonight, but it might at a later point in your career. Let's say you're applying for the Fulbright as a senior, and the Fulbright is maybe an opportunity to go abroad and study abroad or do research abroad or teach English abroad, but they are also very interested in cultural exchange as part of the Fulbright mission. So that would be really important to know when doing a personal statement or an application for Fulbright, right? So if the prompt doesn't give you a lot of clues about what to write, don't just launch into it and write whatever you want. Try to get some sense of what the values of that organization are and write your prompt with that as guidance for yourself. Again, this is a little bit general, but I'm just trying to give you some ideas to think about. One, we use the term story deliberately. If you can tell a story that is more interesting for the reviewers, it gets more attention, you know, so think about trying to respond to the prompt in a story-like way. It may not work in every case, I understand that. I want to say for this first one, I know you can read, and so I'm going to kind of let you read the prompts, but people often feel like they have to talk in great detail about why they became interested in research or why they chose a STEM major or why. And I think you don't need a really in-depth origin story. Sometimes it has a very interesting, I recently read a personal statement, I think, from someone, and they had been interested in astronomy as a child, and their father bought them like a beat up old telescope, and they had some interesting experiences with their father, right, looking at the stars. But you can tell that in 2 or 3 sentences and then launch in. And so that launched me into science. And now here I am. I'm in the such and such lab, you know, in the College of Medicine at UK or whatever. But make that quickly, because for the most part, your funder or the person offering your fellowship is not going to need to know a lot about your early years, or, you know, but it might be nice. You know, I took a higher level math class in high school, and that just really, I found theoretical math so interesting that I decided to go in that in college, right? But very quick, right? But there might be something it's a little bit of a hook for the beginning of your story, but you do not need every detail. You do not need lots of elaboration. And while I'm on that, just a quick hint. I know this is so critical for us when we're undergraduate students, is choosing the major. And there's often a lot of thought put into that, and you worry about it, and it causes anxiety. And so over the years, I have read a number of very, very long discussions of how students chose their major. And so write that and then throw it away or put it in your personal journal, but a fellowship, the person who offers a fellowship or a funder is not going to be interested in a very long discussion of how you chose your major. They don't really care. Your major will be in the application. They want to know what you're doing with that, your kinds of engagements. They don't really need sort of a long philosophical, you know, intro to why you chose psychology. I want to talk on the second bullet about being overly personal. When we talk about these as personal statements, I sometimes think it's very easy to get confused about what personal means. You should not feel obligated in any application to have to excavate all your personal details. If something is very private to you, then that's how it should be kept, right? This application is almost always about funding you for an academic reason or a professional reason. And so you want to think about personal details in that light, like sharing a small thing of my father and I, you know, had a summer where we spent a lot of time on the telescope, and that led me to, right? You may have some personal circumstances that you think are important to share because they were an obstacle to you, or, you know, they greatly changed your life. And sometimes those are important to include, and sometimes that can be a good, that can be something you can ask maybe your recommender to share, because it can be easier coming from a recommender. It can be a little more distant, but you shouldn't ever feel like you have to disclose information about yourself that is really private and personal. I think sometimes students feel pushed into doing that by the mere description of a personal statement, and I don't want you to do that. Think of it as it's sort of an academic personal history, but it's not personal in that way. In general, you want to talk about your experiences in college, right? Because I think everybody in this session is an undergraduate. Well, not me, but they're interested in what you're doing now and where you're taking that. Okay, so for the most part, you're not going to talk about anything in high school. And for some of you, maybe you've only been here a year or so, and so high school is closer, and you had things that you're proud of, and rightfully so, right? They help you come here. But for the most part, you're not going to talk about those things. It might be that you went to a specialized high school and you started research as what for most of us would have been a junior year in high school, and you were already starting college level research. Something like that might be interesting to mention or to start with. But for the most part, your high school experiences are they have influenced you and they have shaped you, but they're probably not going to be what you discuss in your personal statement. And then also, you want to think down the road. And I know that is hard. I sometimes, when I'm talking to students and I talk about career path, and students are like, but I can do this or this or this. And I know that you have many paths open to you. But it's hard. Put yourself in the shoes of the reviewer if you can for a moment and think about it. You know, if they're trying to read about you and why you want this funding and what it's going to do for you, it's not really helpful to them if you say, well, I could be a scientist or a physician, or I might go, you sail around the world, or I might go into a nonprofit field, right? We know that there are many versions of life that you may pursue. But in this particular case, you want to try to talk about a career path that they would be more familiar with, or that would be connected to the award and that would make sense. Does it mean, I always say to students, if you should change your profession later in life, they do not come and take your award back. You don't have to worry about that. They know that you have lots of options, but they need to know maybe what's the most likely one for you at this time, or the one that's most related and relevant to the kinds of research and career interests you're pursuing. So hopefully, we can do some questions a little later on. And if you have a question about this, we can talk about it in more detail, because I know this is really hard for people. They have a hard time maybe narrowing that down, but it's something you really want to think about. I could give you tips for days. I could have put slide after slide after slide in here. And that is where I think we have two, but that's where it's just hard to concentrate on too many tips for your writing. So I want to give you some good ones for any kind of writing, but also I want to say to you, if you have a very specialized application or you want more advice on it, we're happy to talk to you individually. This doesn't have to be your only source of information. Remember, in terms of these, or maybe you don't remember, but let me make you aware that in some of these applications that you're applying for, a lot of people are applying. And so reviewers are reading a similar set of documents over and over and over. So it is a good idea to have a very interesting opening paragraph and have the reviewer be more interested in reading. So that means it's often not a good idea, or not the best idea, to say, my name is so-and-so and I'm a biology major at the University of Kentucky. Right? They probably know that from other parts of your application. So think about another way to open, a more interesting way. Sometimes I will tell students, think about entering your personal statement in the middle of your story. Don't feel like you have to do it in a chronological way, right? Where you start at your childhood and move on through, right? So think about, sometimes I will tell students, write that personal statement and then have a game with yourself, take away the first 2 paragraphs and then start reading it and see if it doesn't start to get at the meat, right? You don't want a lot of fluff in these personal statements. It is very common to have a lot of generic statements. And I just put 2 simple ones, but one, we're glad that you love research. Those of you who are applying for the Beckman and REUs and the CURE fellowships. I mean, we know that about you. We hope that is true, but you love research. Why? You love research and that leads you to do what? You love research and you've had the following outcomes or something, right? But oftentimes students will make a statement that's just a statement like that. I love kids, I'm into, and it just doesn't take you anywhere in the personal statement. You have to give reasons why, you have to give outcomes, you have to give results. So you have to get past those general statements. And a lot of us do that initial kind of writing. So I'm not critiquing you for that, but the critique would be if you don't go back then and sort of put those things to the side and look at the sentences that have more interesting information for the reviewer. It's important to be very specific. And again, it's kind of like that career thing we were talking about earlier. Sometimes that's a little bit intimidating for students because you want to be more general and broad because you're trying to cover a lot of bases and you don't want anyone to dislike one of your ideas. And I understand that, but you would be much better off to be very specific and have a vision and convey that, even if a reviewer read it and said, well, that's a little bit wrong, or that's not quite realistic about how that career works or whatever. I mean, they might not, but they're going to be much happier to read the specifics of your plan and to know what exactly you think you're planning to do than just to read some generalities that they probably are getting from other applicants, maybe. So it really is important to sort of think deeply about your personal statement and the kinds of specifics you want to convey. I have a little bit of an animus toward the word unique because I've just read it so many times, probably a million, over the course of a few years of reading personal statements. Unique means one of a kind. So when you have used unique 3 times in the first paragraph of your personal statement, you might not be using that accurately, right? And we all do that, right? That's become a common word. But think about those common words and then try to eliminate them. The term passion gets used in a lot of student statements. And I think it's I understand you are passionate about your work. But if you go back to your statement and you've used it 7 or 8 times in one page, it starts to lose its meaning completely. And so many of us use it for so many things. It's probably better to avoid some of the cliche type words. Like I use that thinking outside the box deliberately. Please don't use that phrase. Really think about some of these phrases that we use in common colloquial language. That's not what you want in your personal statement. Now, that leads us then into scientific jargon or language. And this can depend on the funder. There are awards that we work with students that they're very, very specific to research. They're very technical. The reviewers for that award will be all in that field or very closely related. And then students have the ability to use some of the technical language they've learned and to explain their project in a way that's appropriate for their discipline. There are other awards that same student, but the reviewers are going to be widely spread across many disciplines, in which case you have to explain your work in language that is broad enough that people can understand, or you have to define it briefly. So sometimes students will come in and I don't really understand the science of what they're doing in the lab, but if they can explain it to me in plainer language, that's great. You know, I work at a university, I'm educated. It's not that I'm incapable of understanding, but I may not know those chemical terms, right? But that doesn't mean I can't understand the reaction if you explain it to me. So this is, again, this is where it's important to know what who's reviewing and what the funder is. Is it NSF, right? Where there are going to be people in your field of science, or is it Fulbright, where they may not have any scientific background, but you may be talking about a scientific research project. So you definitely want to think about who you're writing for. That is really important. Here's my other tips, but this is very common because I think this is advice we get a lot, is repeat the prompt and then go on, right? You probably all got that when writing for your college essays and stuff. At a certain point, that really becomes less helpful. And oftentimes students will repeat the entire prompt in their first sentence and then go on. And I would say the reviewers of the kinds of awards that you're applying for, they know what the prompt is. They know what you're applying. They don't need that. You can go straight into the discussion of your work. Again, we've talked about high school a little bit. For the most part, they're looking at your future. Many of these awards are looking at your potential as much as they have what you've accomplished. They're looking what you will accomplish and what you will do. So write in a future-oriented way. Often that's the best for you to talk about what I'm going to do. I'm going to take what I'm doing right now as a sophomore or a junior at UK, but here's where I'm taking it, right? Here's where I hope to be down the road. The next two are basically the same thing. We tend to say the same thing over and over in multiple ways in these kinds of statements. And because you're writing in small chunks, sometimes it's easy for that to creep in, but your reviewer is reading it all as one document, your whole application. So you don't need to repeat a lot of things. You don't even need to repeat things like what your major is, or because you know, maybe it's a 4 or 5 or 8 page application or something, and you've worked on it over a series of weeks in small chunks. And so I understand how that creeps in, but you've got to go back and read it, or have someone else go back and read your whole documents before you submit it, because you will find that a lot of repetition has crept in there. And that's just not helpful to you. Your reviewer, because they're reading it as one document, they're going to remember from the 1st to the 6th page. You don't need to repeat for them. So, and that gives you room to talk about other accomplishments that you have, other thoughts that you have, other ways that you understand your discipline. It allows you to get more meat in that application. So I've already said this, but again, have someone else read it. If you were intimidated to have me or Emily or Jesse read it, I mean, really, how is it that you're sending it off to a bunch of UK faculty reviewers or reviewers at NSF, or you've got to let somebody read it. We are not reading it to criticize you, to laugh at it, to make you feel bad. We are reading it because we believe in you and what you're trying to do, and we want you to get the award. And so our goal is to just be helpful and help you express yourself better. In order to do that, in order to get the value of having somebody else read it and give you some advice, you have to allow time. Because sometimes if you get too close to the deadline, I know that we've all done that, and we've all procrastinated and we've written the paper the night before. That's not a good strategy generally when you're applying for a major award, because then you don't have time to do these other things that we have talked about. So I would really encourage you to look at the deadline of the particular fellowship that you're talking about. And I didn't put deadlines in here, maybe at a later point. I don't know, Jesse, if you can drop some in the chat, or they can go to the Office of Undergraduate Research website, and Haven and Jesse have these deadlines on the website. But I would look at those now and see how much time, and then kind of work back from what those deadlines are so that you have plenty of time. And then contact us, you know, and maybe you're interested in one of these fellowships, but you have some other ideas down the road. You want to apply for a graduate research fellowship when you're a senior, or you want to apply for the Rhodes Scholarship, or, you know, other things that we weren't really focused on this evening. But both Emily and I are happy to talk to you about those things at a later time. They may fit very well in your academic and career planning. So we would be happy to talk to you not only about the things that you're applying for now, but also some future opportunities. And I do want to open it up for questions. I don't know, maybe people have themselves muted. I'm fine. Emily is monitoring the chat, so I'm fine if people would prefer to put a question there and we can read it for everyone, or if you just would like to unmute yourself and ask the question, that's fine as well.
Pat, I have a question for you. So I've been reviewing scholarship essays for a few years now, and I've noticed in the past year, where you were talking the tip about being vague versus being specific. I've noticed in the past year, a lot of students in their personal statements will say, I'm excited about this opportunity. I want to grow as a student, or
Good.
I want to be a better doctor. And which leads me to say, okay, why? What specifically about this? How specifically do you want to grow? Where specifically do you want to go?
And how are you doing that? Yes, to say that I want to be a better, well, so would everybody who's training to be one, right? Or I want to be a better person, or I really want to improve the state of science in my field. Okay, great. And what? And what does that even mean to me as a reviewer? And I'm not saying that to be sarcastic, but I'm literally think about that. And what? What do you want the reviewer to take from that, right? They need a sentence that says, I'm so committed to this field because I'm focused on this particular problem, and here's how it affects people, and here's the kinds of solutions that are coming down the road. We can see them in science. We know, talk about those kinds of things. It's not that people don't care that you love your research, but that just doesn't take us anywhere. You've got to give us all the things. You're assuming that we're going to kind of write that in ourselves to our personal statement, and we can't do that. You have to tell us, why is the research important? What are you going to do with it? How will it influence people? How will it influence the state of your discipline? I mean, you need to really get in there into sometimes the nitty-gritty details.
Thank you.
And this is hard. And sometimes you have a limited, maybe you only have a long paragraph from your personal statement. They're not always a page, which is why you also have to give it multiple drafts, and why you often have to cut out, particularly the initial sentences, right? Sometimes students don't start getting to the heart of their essays until well into the actual essay. And so then you have to go back and cut out, all the things that are not pertinent or are not direct, and go back and write more. And these statements are hard. I want you to know, we know up front from reading a lot of them, it's very hard to write these, to know what you should write, and that's where giving yourself some time and getting some feedback is really useful for you.
Pat, can I ask, how many of you all have written personal statements before?
I can only see one hand up in the thing that I've got. You've got, oh, the people are putting the, yes, great.
And of those of you that have written personal statements, what did your process look like? What challenges did you encounter? Because likely if you've encountered them, other students have as well.
We do have a question if we want to let people marinate on that. It says, this may be a silly question, no silly questions, but do you all look over personal statements for professional programs as well, besides different awards like medical school personal statements or graduate school?
Yeah, we will. No, we're happy to do that. It is sometimes, it sort of depends on the time of year. Sometimes we're deep in the weeds with a particular award that has a deadline, and we don't have time at that particular moment. So I would say, again, give us some time. It's occasionally a student can send me something that day and I can respond that day, but frequently that's not the case. And sometimes I might not be able to respond to several days if we're in the middle of interviews for a major award or something. So you want to give us some time to look at it. And also, it is a good idea when you send me those kinds of things that you give me some sense of, send your CV as well, and make sure I have the prompt, and so that I have, sometimes I barely have enough information if I don't know you well. I may not be able to give the best personal statement advice without a little more information about what you're applying for and what they're looking for. So sometimes it's helpful to give me a little more information than just the one document, but we will absolutely help you. Because a medical school statement, for example, is a little different from applying for a graduate research program, is a little different from applying for Fulbright. So they all have different goals. But also the writing center will help too. If we, we're not a very big office if we don't, so use your other resources and don't be afraid, I think, to ask your research mentor to read if you're applying for an REU or an NSF or something. I think they will be happy to do that. Don't give them your first draft, give them your third draft, right? Get yourself through it a little bit. Don't give them the one with all the typos and stuff. Go through and give them a better draft so that the feedback that they give you is more helpful to you.
We have a comment. Creating an outline was the most difficult part for me. And I was actually going to ask that question. What do you feel like is the best way to get started? I think a lot of times students kind of have trouble just putting.
Yeah, and that's a good point. And I think if an outline works for you, then use it. And I think it can be helpful. And sometimes, it's a guide. But some people never worked well with outlines. And so to say to them, you have to prepare an outline, it may not work with you, but if you've never tried it, try it, right? And give yourself some bullets. And it can be rough. You know what I mean? That can be kind of a rough way to start, but it is helpful for you to think about some of the points. At the very least, if an outline seems intimidating, right, then what are the important points you want to get in your essay? Go ahead and write those down just as bullet points, just as simple, I definitely want to mention the summer research I did right after high school or whatever, because it's very relevant to that. And what did you learn from that? I definitely want to talk about some shadowing I did, an experience I had, because I think that directed me in my research. There are things like that, and you may want to definitely see, and you may find that helps you figure out when you see what those really important parts are. That may tell you how you want to shape your essay, kind of, as opposed to just launching in. Everybody has a hard time launching in, and I understand that. The introductions are very, very difficult. And often I say to students, you'll have to go back and rewrite your introduction after you see sort of where your focus is later. And people do that for grants, faculty do that, that's not an uncommon thing. But one of the things you don't want to get to, and we all do this, but don't get so attached that you can't let something go, right? Sometimes the best thing that you can do for a document is delete some of it. Right? Because it's just not working. It's too vague. It's not to the point. You have to be willing to say, this is not the right information for this particular part of the application. It doesn't mean you have to lose it. Put it in some kind of Google Doc that you keep with, maybe you thought it was a particularly well put together paragraph. It just doesn't work here. That it might work later in a graduate application or something. So, but be willing to really, really look at your work critically and think about changing it and being willing to rewrite. That is really, really critical. And I think if you ask your faculty mentors and the faculty that you've had in classes and stuff, they will tell you they have to rewrite all the time. They don't, when they're writing major grant proposals, I promise you, they are not submitting the first drafts or the second or the fourth. And they're also getting help from Office of Sponsored Research on campus. The advice we're giving you now, hopefully you'll be using throughout your career, not just to apply for the Cure Fellowship or the Beckman.
Okay, we have a comment. Digging deep into what my interests really are and being able to express it took time and effort, but definitely several drafts help. So that is good advice. Then we have a question. When writing a research-related personal statement, like an NSF, RU, or SERP, what is the best way to balance the personal why what you plan to accomplish, and relevant research experiences.
I guess it depends on what the prompt actually is. Sometimes it doesn't have to be a personal why. Like if you're wanting to be at an REU, like the fact that if you're doing research in that field, or you want to do research in that field, or it's closely related to your career, that's good enough. I want to come and learn from this particular project. This faculty, they oftentimes ask you to talk about, I mean, many REUs will have several faculty involved, and they'll ask you to talk about the type of project you want to work with, or maybe prioritize which faculty. I would talk about that specifically. I mean, that is your personal why. I want to get a much deeper experience in this particular research project. I'm very interested in this institution. Professor so-and-so wrote an article recently that I read in a class, and I really was interested in this research approach. So I may not be answering this question exactly right, but I don't know. You don't have to have a big internal motivation, for why. It can be because it's related to your research or future career goals. That is your why. So if I'm misunderstanding, Diksha, will you clarify if I'm not getting at what you need there?
Yeah, I guess when you have like a word limit, for example, like with the SURF, when you have to basically write like a research proposal too, like for what you're planning on accomplishing over the summer, like balancing this like words for that, or like how much time you want to spend on your proposal, and like relevant experiences and things like that, and like an introduction.
And that depends. I would say mostly I'm go for what the funders want. Like if they're funding you for a research proposal, like if it's Goldwater, I want you to spend a lot of time on the actual research and what you've done and what you've accomplished, and what the results are, and where the science is taking that, right? What you think the future steps are. I don't think you need lots of personal information. NSF, the Graduate Research Fellowship for a program, for example, gives you the opportunity to write a research proposal and then a personal statement where you can talk about but they don't even mean personal. They mean all the ways you've been involved in science, service things you may have done related to your science, right? It can be a variety of things. But I think oftentimes, and I would be happy to look at a specific prompt for you if that would be helpful, or application, but oftentimes students feel like they have to reveal more personal information than is actually necessary. Sometimes it can be helpful. For example, if there is an award where sometimes they'll give you this general, what else would you like the committee to know? And they allow you to write 300 words or something. And sometimes that's very helpful if you are going to add a certain level of, maybe you're going to add an element of diversity, socioeconomic, racial, and ethnic. You're from a part of the country. Sometimes I remember once many years ago, NSF talked to me at a conference about they didn't see enough applications from students at Kentucky. So sometimes being from Kentucky, right, can be helpful in applying. They want to spread those out around the country. So sometimes that can be useful. Sometimes you had a particular experience with science or your research that you couldn't get in other places. And so sometimes that can be a place to put that in. So those kind of open paragraphs like that can be used in a wide variety of ways, depending on what your ultimate goal is. I think part of the reason I'm bringing this up with the personal is sometimes some of you have had hard things happen in your life, and they've maybe affected your academics, or maybe not, but they've certainly affected you. And I think sometimes students feel like they have to reveal that, right? Because it will make them more competitive, or it will make them stand out, or whatever. And I would encourage you to think closely about that, because if it's information that you don't want out there, there may be multiple people reading that and you may not feel comfortable. And I don't think you should ever feel pressured to do that. Sometimes if you've had, let's say you had a bad semester, you had a family member who was sick, and so you got a poor grade in maybe one of your major courses as a result, and I know for some of you a poor grade is a B or C, right? But that may be where your recommender can say, this student had a particularly hard semester and they had a lot of things going on and they performed to the best of their ability within the circumstances. And then that's enough. And then you don't necessarily have to address it. So that's another point that we're not, this is for general application guidance, not really personal statement, but I want you guys to think about your application as a whole, right? That includes your letters, that includes your CV if that's asked for, that includes your transcript. Like there's lots of ways to convey information. I will sometimes say to students, if we're nominating them for an award through our office, I often have to write a nomination letter. And so that's yet another document that can go in that can sing your praises, right? But from a different, sometimes I can give context about what a difficult major you're in or what a challenging major you're in or why you took these extra graduate courses, right? So think of all of the elements of your application and how can you use them to best convey all of the excellent work that you have been doing at UK. Did that help?
Yes, yeah, thank you.
All right, another question. Do you have any tips on how to flow ideas from one point to another, specifically if the personal statement prompt has several different questions?
Yep, that is really hard, actually. Particularly if it seems as though the personal statement needs to be sort of in an essay form or story form. And I guess you have to, and that's hard because sometimes they don't seem like terribly related things. One, occasionally on an application, you can actually get away with doing some bullet point. They don't require it to be written always in a paragraph form. So sometimes you can get away with conveying things in short, very short paragraphs, like a couple of sentences and then next bullet point. So think about that too, that sometimes you can format it in a way that works for you. But if you can't, and you have to write it more as a longer document or more in an essay form, then that's where writing multiple times and letting somebody else look at it to help you find a transition or a way that it feeds in, like research experience, and sometimes can naturally lead into a discussion of your career. And but so it sort of depends. I don't know exactly what topics you're talking about, but if you're trying to, talk about very different things, that can be tough. And it may be that having someone else read it and give you some help with that and sort of even talking about it out loud and why you think those things is connected or why you feel like you need to bring them up in the same essay, maybe that will help you to do it. Sometimes reading out loud. Sometimes I think we want an easy transition like a nevertheless or thus or regardless, and we just want that to be our transition and move on. And, sometimes that's the best we can do because we don't have space or whatever, but oftentimes that's not, you can sometimes find at least a sentence that will bridge between the paragraphs, but that's difficult. I don't think anybody feels like they have an exact answer for that. So if it makes you feel better, that's hard for everybody.
All right, and one more question in the chat. To get our personal statement reviewed, do we make an appointment in person or email you directly to send over work?
You can do a wide variety of things. It is often helpful if you want to make an appointment and talk about it, I'm happy to do that, but it's often helpful if you can send me the document the day before at least, because then I can read it and think about it a little bit before I meet with you. And I think, Emily, do you like to follow that same style? It helps us to look at the document. Sometimes when we're there sitting and talking with you, it's hard if we're sitting there trying to read your document while you're watching us, I like to read it before and then it can kind of roll around in the back of my mind and sometimes ideas will occur to me. So my style would be often to have you send it to me. Now, if you're comfortable with me just sending you some feedback, sometimes via email or, an editing document, I'm happy to do that. If you may not have time to meet with me, or that may be a busy time for me and you can't get in. But some students I know really like to also be able to discuss it face to face. So it's a little bit what your particular preference is.
All right, another question. How should a personal statement be concluded? For example, should it be more focused on summary or making a strong impression or something else?
Yeah, what a good question. This is so hard because people often want to kind of, or they often want to do this thing like we do at the bottom of cover letters, like, thank you so much for considering my materials. I'm really interested in this opportunity and Happy New Year to you. You know, they don't do that, but but we sort of vaguely sort of wander around at the end. We don't really know how to end. So when I'm working oftentimes with students with Fulbright, they have so much information to get in there. I'm just like, it's fine to just end. You write that last paragraph. We do not sum it up, and Fulbright is used to that and they don't mind. And I would tell you that a lot of these major awards that you're applying for are not going to be that concerned if you don't have a formal closing paragraph, because they know they're asking you to do a lot in a limited space. So for the most part, I would say students should worry about that less than they do. Right. I know that's not what they tell you when writing necessarily a paper for class or a research document or a thesis. I mean, I recognize it's not good advice in all cases, but many times you're trying to convey a lot of information, years of work and research and academics in, less than a page or a page at most. And so I think that in some place that's the least important. If you can end with some important fact or an important result from research or something, that's always nice, right? If you can have that, a more powerful takeaway. But to be honest, it is more powerful to sort of end just with a very good paragraph on your experience than to end with this kind of wishy-washy paragraph about how I really want this opportunity and I really think I'm qualified, right? I mean, all those kinds of things, those statements, you shouldn't have to say that because your work should be apparent, how much you care about the project and what you're doing and where you're going to take it, right? That's where I would much rather see a student spend the time than really agonizing over the final 3 sentences of their document. So that is my opinion as a reviewer, and that is the way I read. And this is where you're going to get some advice that sometimes is contradictory. Your faculty mentor may have a different feeling, or someone at the Writing Center may say, but I think I've been reading these for enough years and I've watched reviewers, sat in on some review meetings and stuff, and I rarely hear a faculty member say, oh, they didn't have an appropriate summation paragraph. I don't know. Emily, do you agree or disagree? Or
I agree. I feel like it's kind of what you were talking about earlier, where we're taught to kind of introduce what we're going to say it, and then sum up what we said. And I think a lot of times that kind of summing up what you said is just repeating things you've already said. So it may feel abrupt, but I think that just kind of ending with something that is kind of new information is better.
yeah, I think so too. I really do think that this is, I would worry less about that in your application of almost all that we've discussed. I would worry less about that.
I think that is our last question in the chat, but if anyone wants to unmute, please feel free to do so. We're a friendly group.
Absolutely.
Most days, I guess.
And really appreciative of your time. I know that you guys are busy, you have a lot to do. And so I am grateful, that you were willing to come and listen to me talk about this, but I'm also want to compliment you for doing this and for making these applications. They are not easy and it's intimidating and you kind of have to put yourself out there in a competitive process. And we know it's not easy. And so I hope I haven't in any way conveyed this stuff is hard and what you're doing is challenging. And we know that. So I don't want you to think like, oh, I'm having a hard time with it. It must be easy for other people. It is not. Right. And it's not easier for faculty and it's not, these are hard statements to write, these personal statements.
And it's not even always easy for us to be able to articulate what our advice would be.
Right.
So sometimes you can have a really good personal statement and there's just something about it that we can kind of help mold it a little bit. But yeah, it can be difficult to get all the information across that you need to get across in a short period of time.
Yep, absolutely.
Thank you, Pat and Emily, for hosting this tonight. You all, I put the fellowship deadlines. Beckman is the first that wraps up February 1st. The NSF REUs, I know we had several that were looking to apply for that. The deadlines vary by location, so you really need to dig into that webpage, that program's REU site, to figure out what they're looking for and when that deadline is. And if you all need any additional help, Emily is recording this and we'll have it uploaded to their YouTube channel. So if one of your friends couldn't attend tonight, please direct them to NCA's YouTube channel so you can share that with them. Thank you all so much for tonight.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.